My brother stole clients from the business I built alone, so I quietly started a new company that destroyed his reputation and took every contract back. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and I built my consulting business from nothing. Literally nothing. My first office was a cramped corner of my tiny apartment, a peeling paint and flickering light fixture keeping me company through countless nights of spreadsheets, emails, and frantic client calls. I remember pacing the floor with my phone pressed to my ear, trying to explain deliverables to a client who clearly didn't understand, while my stomach growled because I'd skipped dinner again. Every late-night caffeine buzz and crumpled proposal felt like a step closer to something bigger. Even if it meant sacrificing sleep, social life, and any semblance of a normal weekend, Ryan, my older brother, stepped into that world with what seemed like perfect timing. He's the kind of guy everyone immediately likes. Smooth, confident, with a grin that makes people think he knows exactly what he's doing. When he offered to help with networking and praised my ideas, I felt an almost dizzying sense of relief. Finally, I wasn't alone. I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe I don't have to carry everything myself anymore. We started bouncing ideas off each other in those tiny evenings, him sitting on my worn couch, leaning back with a confident ease while I scribbled notes in my notebook, occasionally laughing at his jokes. At first, it was everything I'd hoped for. Ryan introduced me to some of his contacts, suggested strategies I hadn't considered, and even offered to help with client pitches. I felt like I'd finally found a partner I could trust. For the first time, the crushing weight of responsibility felt shared. Our collaboration made the apartment feel alive in a way it hadn't before, the constant clatter of keyboards, the half-empty coffee mugs, the muted excitement in our conversations. It all felt like progress. By the end of that month, the business was gaining traction. A small client here, a repeat contract there, and I began to feel a cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, this dream I'd been grinding toward for years was finally within reach. And having Ryan there, supportive and seemingly loyal, made the tiny apartment feel like a headquarters for something real. But even as I went to bed that night, exhausted but hopeful, I couldn't shake a small, nagging thought that maybe trusting family this blindly could come with unseen risks. I didn't want to admit it at first, but the first cracks started showing sooner than I expected. It was subtle at first. Armand would casually mention an idea in a client meeting as if it had been his all along, or he'd tweak one of my proposals before sending it out, adding phrases that made it sound like he'd been involved from the start. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that maybe I was overworked and reading too much into it. But the nagging feeling lingered, like a quiet shadow hovering over every pitch and contract. I remember one evening, sprawled across the couch with my laptop, watching him talk on the phone to one of our bigger clients. He laughed in that easy, charming way of his, promising things he hadn't even cleared with me yet. My stomach tightened. I wanted to storm in and take the call away, but I stopped myself, thinking, just breathe. Maybe he's just enthusiastic. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted, and it gnawed at me more than any sleepless night ever had. It wasn't just the clients. He began subtly undermining me in small ways that were easy to dismiss but hard to ignore, rearranging meetings without telling me, sending emails that implied I'd agreed to terms I hadn't, or leaving out crucial details from updates. Each time, I caught myself hesitating before confronting him, because a part of me still wanted to trust him, still clung to that relief I'd felt when he first stepped into the chaos of my life. The worst part was how natural it all felt to him. He'd flash that grin and say things like, "Don't stress, I've got this handled. You've done enough already," making it sound like he was just helping me carry the load. And the clients, bless them, never noticed her, at least never said anything. I started questioning myself instead, replaying every conversation and interaction, wondering if I was imagining it all. By the time I shut my laptop and went to bed, the exhaustion wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional. I was starting to realize that having Ryan in the business might not just be support. It could also be the beginning of something that would test every ounce of patience and trust I had built up over the years. And deep down, a small, unsettling thought kept whispering, Maybe I can't see the storm that's coming. It hit me like a gut punch one Tuesday morning. I opened my inbox to find an email from one of our biggest clients, someone I'd been courting for months. Someone I'd poured hours into building a proposal for. The email was polite enough, but the message beneath it stung like acid. They'd decided to move forward with Ryan's version of the plan, not mine. My fingers froze on the keyboard, heart hammering. I reread it 3 times, hoping I'd misread, hoping it was a misunderstanding. But no, Ryan had reached out behind my back, pitched directly, and they'd signed on with him presenting as the lead. I remember storming into the kitchen, where he was casually making coffee, humming some tune, completely unaware of the tornado I was about to unleash. "Ryan, did you—" My voice cracked. He turned, smiling, like he had no idea what I was talking about. "Did I what?" he said, pouring cream into his cup. "The Taylor account, why? Did they sign with you instead of me?" I demanded. He shrugged, smooth as ever. "Oh, I just thought they'd appreciate a fresh perspective. You were swamped anyway, right?" I didn't want to overwhelm you. The words hit me harder than a punch. His casual tone, the way he made it sound like he was helping, like he was protecting meat, made my blood boil and my head spin at the same time. I wanted to scream, to tear him apart, but the calmness I'd been cultivating held me back. I retreated to my desk, staring at the proposal I had spent weeks perfecting. My apartment, normally my sanctuary, felt suffocating. The peeling paint, the dim light. The cluttered desk now seemed oppressive. The quiet hum of the refrigerator mocked me as I replayed every conversation with him. Every meeting, every friendly pat on the back. How had I been so blind? For hours I sat there, heart racing, mind spinning, trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't confront him outright, not yet. Not while the client was already on his side. The anger simmered beneath my skin, thick and heavy. But I knew if I acted impulsively, I'd lose everything by the time night fell. I was exhausted, drained in a way that sleep couldn't fix. And as I leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling, I realized something terrifying. Ryan wasn't just overstepping, he was strategically undermining me. And if I wasn't careful, he could take everything I'd built from me. Silently, piece by piece. The days after the Taylor account incident were unbearable. Every interaction with Ryan felt like walking on a tightrope over a pit I didn't fully see. He had this uncanny way of twisting things, making me question my own memory. I'd recall sending a client an update, only to find out he'd altered the wording, subtly making it look like I hadn't handled the situation properly. At first, I tried to chalk it up to miscommunication, telling myself I was just stressed, that it was nothing. But the pattern was undeniable, and the more I noticed it, the more my trust eroded. One afternoon, I caught him casually flipping through my notes while I was on a call. He looked up, startled for a moment, then laughed it off. "Just making sure we're on the same page," he said, that grin plastered across his face. My stomach churned. That grin, so charming, so disarming, had once made me feel relieved. Now it made me feel like I'd been punched in the gut. Every time he smiled like that, I felt manipulated, cornered. I remember sitting alone in the tiny conference corner of my apartment, watching the city lights blur through the window and thinking about how far this had gone. His subtle manipulations weren't just small irritations anymore. They were attacks on the very foundation of my business. Emails, client calls, internal notes. Every little thing was fair game. I began to second-guess myself constantly. Was I overreacting? Was I being paranoid? The self-doubt was almost worse than the betrayal itself. The worst was when he started speaking to clients without me, offering strategies and making promises I hadn't approved. I could hear his voice through the phone speaker during a client call one night. Calm and persuasive, and I felt my chest tighten. He was slowly rewriting the story of our business, making it seem like he was the visionary while I was the backup. By the time I shut my laptop that night, I felt completely drained, not just physically but mentally. My apartment, my sanctuary, felt like a cage, and I couldn't shake the fear creeping into my mind. This isn't just miscommunication. He's doing this on purpose, and I don't know if I can stop it before it's too late. By the time part 5 began, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Ryan wasn't just overstepping boundaries anymore. He was systematically taking over the business I had built from scratch. Every week, another client seemed to drift into his orbit, sometimes without even a whisper to me. I would get calls or emails thanking him personally, praising his insights. And I'd sit there, staring at my screen, stomach twisting, wondering how I had let this happen. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was this deep, knowing frustration that made my hands shake when I typed out client updates. Fearing that any small misstep would give him more leverage, I tried confronting him once. In the small kitchen we'd commandeered as our break area. "Ryan, I need to know why you're going behind my back with clients," I said, my voice tight. He looked at me, casual as ever, and shrugged. "I'm just trying to help the business grow. You've been working so hard, it's exhausting. Don't take it personally." I wanted to scream, wanted to shake him, but his charm, his easy demeanor made me pause, made me doubt myself. Was I really overreacting? Was I imagining the betrayal? Then came the tipping point. I discovered a contract he'd signed without my knowledge major, changes to payment schedules, deliverables, and even timelines, all in his name. My pulse spiked. He had crossed the line from subtle manipulation to outright theft of authority. That evening, I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment. The hum of the refrigerator louder than ever, flipping through emails and contracts like a detective piecing together evidence. The realization hit me. He wasn't just undermining me. He was trying to erase me from the story I'd built piece by piece. I felt cornered, isolated, and furious, but also strangely energized. For the first time, a strategy began to form in my mind, a quiet, calculated plan that wouldn't involve yelling, crying, or desperate confrontations. I knew I had to outsmart him, not just react. My hands hovered over the keyboard, drafting ideas, brainstorming ways to regain control while keeping him oblivious. As I finally leaned back, exhausted, I couldn't shake the thought that kept echoing in my head. He thinks he's untouchable. He has no idea what's coming. And with that, the first real spark of a plan flickered to life in the darkness of my apartment. By the time I started thinking seriously about a plan, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The betrayal had cut deep, but it also sharpened my focus in a way I hadn't felt in years. I knew confrontation wouldn't work, not yet. Ryan thrived on charm and manipulation. He was too slick for me to openly call him out without risking everything. So I decided to build quietly, to construct something so solid that he wouldn't even know what hit him until it was too late. I began sketching out the new company in the dead of night. The apartment bathed in the glow of my laptop screen. Every detail mattered: branding, client approach, communication strategies. I wanted it professional, polished, and trustworthy, so much so that clients wouldn't question leaving Ryan for me. The thrill of planning in secret was intoxicating. I could almost feel the scales tipping in my favor, each calculated step bringing me closer to reclaiming what was mine. Meanwhile, Ryan carried on as usual, oblivious to the storm quietly brewing. I'd watch him from the corner of my eye during client calls, pretending to laugh at his jokes, all while mentally mapping out my moves. I started contacting minor clients under the radar, sending subtle proposals, offering more value, more personalized attention. It was delicate work. Too much too soon would raise suspicion. Too little would waste time. Every interaction, every email, every call was a chess move. I remember one night, long past midnight, sitting on the floor of my apartment with piles of notes around me, plotting client meetings and incentive strategies. My apartment smelled faintly of stale coffee, and the hum of my old laptop filled the silence. My hands ached from writing and rewriting proposals, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in months. By the end of that week, the first whispers of interest came from clients I hadn't spoken to in months. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make me believe this quiet plan could work. And as I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but focused, a single thought consumed me. He has no idea what's coming. And when it hits, there will be no turning back. The first signs that my plan was working came almost quietly, like ripples spreading across still water. Small clients I'd nurtured for years started responding to my emails with more enthusiasm than I'd seen in months. I didn't brag or announce anything. Everything was subtle, strategic. I offered better service, faster responses, and personalized attention that Ryan had long neglected to provide. I could feel the tension building inside me, a quiet satisfaction that he was starting to notice that things were shifting, but he didn't know how or why. One afternoon, I watched him during a client call, pretending to take notes while he confidently pitched some new ideas. I noticed the client's body language, the subtle frown, the distracted glances, the hesitation in their voice. My pulse quickened. He thought he was in control, but the cracks were appearing. I whispered to myself, almost laughing quietly, "You have no idea what's coming." By now, the apartment felt alive with tension. I'd rearranged my workspace, had sticky notes plastered everywhere, and a whiteboard full of client names, notes, and timelines. Each day, I checked off small wins, tiny victories that collectively were turning the tide. The sensory overloads, the clatter of keyboards, the hum of the fridge, the faint aroma of reheated coffee made me hyper-aware of every small movement Ryan made. Every call he took, every proposal he sent, I observed carefully. Mapping his weaknesses, the thrill wasn't just in winning clients back. It was in watching him scramble without realizing it. A casual mention here, a subtle follow-up there, and suddenly clients were asking for me by name. I could see it in the emails he forwarded, in the messages I intercepted. He sensed a threat, but the source was invisible to him. By the time night fell, I sat back on my couch, exhausted but quietly victorious. The apartment was dark, the city lights glinting through the window, and I could almost hear the shift in the air, the balance of power tilting. My stomach twisted with anticipation. One thought echoed louder than any other. Soon he'll realize he's not untouchable. Soon he'll see the ground beneath him start to crumble. Everything changed one Thursday afternoon, and I still remember the moment, clearly, the sharp sting of shock mixed with a surge of vindication. One of our biggest clients called me directly, not Ryan. Their voice was hesitant, almost guilty. I think there's been a misunderstanding with some of the deliverables Ryan promised. Can you help us sort this out?" My chest tightened. I had anticipated small wins, minor shifts, but this was a major blunder on his part. It was exactly the leverage I needed. I felt a strange mixture of disbelief and satisfaction as I walked them through the corrections, outlining what Ryan had overpromised and underdelivered. Every detail I highlighted was a careful reminder that I was competent, reliable, and the person they could truly trust. The client's tone softened, relief bleeding through every word. "Honestly, we weren't sure who to turn to, but we know you've always handled things well," they said. My heart pounded. Finally, Ryan's mistakes were visible to someone outside the office, and the cracks in his carefully constructed facade were showing that evening. I sat on the couch, laptop balanced on my knees, and pieced together a subtle plan to amplify the fallout. I wasn't reckless. I didn't want to attack him directly. But the idea of clients seeing his failures and turning to me was intoxicating. I started drafting follow-up emails, planning 101 calls, and quietly documenting every mishandled contract. It was meticulous work, but I could feel the shift happening. The apartment felt charged that night, the hum of the fridge, the faint smell of reheated coffee, even the creaking floorboards seemed louder, almost like witnesses to my plotting. I glanced at Ryan across the room, laughing casually at a TV show, unaware that his empire was quietly unraveling right under his nose. I felt the thrill of control, mixed with the lingering bitterness of betrayal. By bedtime, the first ripples of panic were visible in Ryan's behavior. He was checking emails more frequently, pacing, nervously tapping his pen against the table. And in that moment, I realized with quiet certainty the balance had finally begun to tip. But as the city lights flickered outside my window, a shiver ran down my spine, because I knew the most satisfying moves were still ahead. By the time part 9 rolled around, the tension had reached a boiling point. Ryan had begun noticing the shift, and I could see it in the way he carried himself, his easy charm replaced by sharp glances and restless pacing. He tried subtle intimidation, sending pointed emails, making offhand remarks during client calls, all meant to unsettle me. But I had built a rhythm, a calculated patience, and nothing he did could shake my focus. The anger that had simmered for months had transformed into a precise, strategic determination. One night, I remember him leaning over my desk, voice low and tight. "I don't know what you're doing, but clients are asking for you directly. This isn't fair." I didn't flinch. I met his gaze calmly, letting the silence do most of the work. "I'm just doing my job," I said evenly. The frustration in his eyes was almost satisfying. It was the first time I saw the mask slip, the first crack in the facade of control he'd carried so effortlessly. Meanwhile, the client base quietly continued to shift under our feet. Contracts that had once been his strongholds were now tentatively leaning toward me. I had approached each one methodically, offering personalized attention, clear timelines, and a reliability Ryan had never prioritized. I documented every interaction, every promise kept, every failure on his part, storing them carefully for the moment when the leverage would be undeniable. The apartment, usually a refuge, felt charged with quiet anticipation. The hum of the fridge, the scattered notebooks, and sticky notes. Even the flickering light above my desk, all of it, seemed to pulse in sync with the plan unfolding. I was exhausted, yes, but it was a focused exhaustion, a heady mix of adrenaline and satisfaction. By the end of that week, Ryan's panic became almost palpable. Clients whispered concerns, tentative doubts crept into meetings, and his once insatiable confidence began to wobble. And in the quiet of my apartment, I allowed myself a small, almost wicked smile, knowing that I had taken the first real step toward reclaiming everything he had tried to steal. Yet, in the back of my mind, I knew the hardest and most satisfying moves were still to come. By part 10, the dominoes were starting to fall in ways I had quietly orchestrated. Ryan's once untouchable reputation was beginning to unravel. I could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a fire. Clients I had slowly cultivated were now fully aware of the discrepancies in his work. Every missed deadline, every vague promise he had made, was now surfacing in conversations, subtly highlighted by me, without ever saying a word about his mistakes. The power dynamic was shifting. He couldn't put his finger on why. I remember one call with a long-term client that had once been Ryan's favorite. They were hesitant at first, politely questioning some recent miscommunications. I calmly walked them through the solutions, highlighting my availability and reliability. "I know Ryan tried to manage this, but I wanted to make sure everything was addressed properly," I said. Careful not to attack, just presenting the facts. Their relief was immediate. "Thank you. We really appreciate your guidance," they said. It was like watching a tide turn, subtle but unstoppable. Ryan's panic was almost tangible now. I could see it in the way he tapped his pen against his notebook, in the forced smiles during meetings, and the nervous glances at emails he hadn't sent yet. It was intoxicating, a slow burn of satisfaction to see him scramble while I remained calm and methodical. My apartment became a command center, notes, spreadsheets, and timelines covering every inch of wall space. Every movement he made, every client interaction, I tracked carefully, building the evidence that would cement his downfall. Evenings were the most thrilling. The city lights outside my window glimmered like stars, but inside, the apartment was alive with silent tension, the hum of the laptop, the faint smell of coffee, the rustle of papers as I planned my next step. I knew that the final wave of clients turning, the ultimate confrontation, was imminent. And as I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but focused, a thought ran through my mind. Soon everything he built on charm and deceit will crumble, and there will be nothing he can do to stop it. By the time part 11 arrived, the endgame was in motion, and the tension had reached a breaking point. Ryan was visibly unraveling. As he used to handle effortlessly, now ended in awkward silences. And emails that once radiated confidence were hesitant, filled with second-guessing. I could see the panic simmering just beneath his calm facade. Clients were slowly but surely leaning toward me, citing reliability, responsiveness, and the tangible results I had always delivered. It was vindicating, but I knew the payoff would only hit its full force when I remained composed. letting his mistakes speak for themselves. The day of the final confrontation. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make threats, didn't seek revenge in a flashy, dramatic way. I met him in our usual meeting space, the apartment conference corner. We went through contracts and client updates as if nothing had changed. "Ryan, I've taken care of the Johnson and Taylor accounts. Everything is finalized," I said. Matter of fact. He froze, a flicker of disbelief passing over his face. His calm veneer cracked for just a moment, and I didn't need to say more. The facts, the results, and the client's trust were all undeniable, and they were mine. I remember the subtle thrill as he realized the tide had turned. The same clients who had once adored his charm were now fully aligned with me. I had reclaimed every major contract quietly, efficiently, and without drama, and yet the satisfaction was overwhelming. The apartment felt charged with a victorious energy, the hum of the laptop, the faint smell of coffee, even the city lights outside seemed sharper. More alive, there was no shouting, no vindictive spectacle, just a quiet, absolute dismantling of everything he had tried to build at my expense. And as I sat back and watched him process the reality, I felt a strange mixture of relief, satisfaction, and empowerment. For the first time in months, the exhaustion in my chest was replaced with a calm sense of control. But even as I allowed myself that moment of triumph, I knew one truth: the scars of betrayal don't disappear. They linger, subtle but persistent, reminding you how fragile trust can be. And in that quiet, I understood the ultimate lesson: resilience, patience, and strategic thinking can win battles that anger alone never could. Sitting in my apartment after it was all over, I finally let myself breathe. The city lights outside were twinkling, the hum of the refrigerator, and the faint aroma of coffee grounding me in the present. The business was thriving, every major client reclaimed, and Ryan's reputation quietly in ruins, but the victory felt more profound than just numbers or contracts. It was about reclaiming control, proving to myself that I could outmaneuver betrayal with patience and strategy. Rather than impulsive rage, I spent that evening reflecting on the months of betrayal, subtle manipulation, and stolen opportunities. The anger I had felt had transformed into something sharper and more focused: understanding, clarity, and empowerment. I realized that I had been so consumed with proving Ryan wrong that I had discovered my own strength, discipline, and resilience in the process. The apartment that had once felt claustrophobic and heavy with tension now felt like a sanctuary. The walls lined with evidence of my perseverance and tactical patience. There was a strange, quiet satisfaction in the way justice had unfolded. I hadn't needed confrontation, shouting, or vindictive theatrics. Everything had been resolved methodically, quietly, efficiently. The clients, once unsure and hesitant, were loyal to me not because of revenge, but because of trust, consistency, and reliability. That, more than anything, was the ultimate validation. The work I had poured my heart into mattered, and my integrity had won over deception. As I leaned back on the couch, I thought about Ryan not with hatred, but with the sober acknowledgement that some people are incapable of loyalty, and some betrayals are lessons in disguise. The scars remain, subtle and lingering, but they are also reminders of what I can endure and how I can rise stronger every time. I felt a profound sense of closure, a quiet empowerment that no one could take away. And in that still, dark apartment, with the city humming beneath me, I whispered to myself a truth I would never forget. I built something that not even betrayal could break, and now nothing can shake the foundation I've rebuilt.